The same is true for the nature of sexuality as it is for drug use. Human beings have always found ways to alter their minds to feel what they might not otherwise be able to feel on their own. It's legal to do it with alcohol and drugs prescribed by physicians, but we aren't allowed to come up with our own ways to do it without risking being severely punished, which is wrong in a free society because we're taught we are free to decide for ourselves about things that affect only us. So instead of our children growing up being taught about their true and much simpler to understand sexual nature, or their want and even need to alter their minds from time to time while being schooled in the dangers associated with abusing any particular substance, they're handed a test with no rules of who gets it right and who gets it wrong, where their lives hang in the balance of how they deal with it. Growing up learning how to develop safe eating habits is handled much the same way. Our kids are told half-truths or lies and then left to the consumer market to make their own choices. I'm not saying the government should tell our kids what to eat or what should be allowed on store shelves. I'm saying we should not be making money selling toxic food to our kids and should be making sure our kids know what life is all about. We are the ones who do it, all of it. We have the ability to know what's right and wrong. We just don't choose to take responsibility for it. So problems are created and governments have to step in and fix them. But governments don't fix anything. They only make them worse. So why do we keep coming back here to have this same discussion every election cycle, but nothing ever changes? Life is not a game. Reality is what it is, and it isn't all that complicated when adequately understood. Drug use and sexuality can be understood, but we rather choose to deal with them in a manner that gives government power over our future. Before we can debate what should be done about these issues, first we need to understand what these issues are actually about. If we did, there may not be a problem that government needs to address. But this thing where we make up a bunch of falsehoods to build social shrines around doesn't make much for a foundation to launch a serious debate from, which is obvious at the outset if you happen to understand the overall issues. That's how I know that these issues are spun in such a way as to waste our time talking about them. As far as abortions go, no one likes abortions. The problem isn't abortions, it's the need for abortions. That's the problem. Abortion is a reality born out of unwanted pregnancies. So here again, the problem goes back to our failure to control our sexuality over how our natural instincts are pushing us in the most unnatural directions. But then how are we supposed to intelligently address it if we're pretending to ourselves that our sexuality is something that it isn't? Sex is what it is. It's not supposed to be there, but it is. If we aren't willing to face the fact that we are first and foremost wild animals who domesticated ourselves into an intelligent society, confusing the way Mother Nature has protected us from sexuality for millions of years, then why are we even trying to solve these kinds of problems in the first place? Conservatives' approach to abortion is along the lines of abstinence from sex outside of marriage so as not to produce unwanted pregnancies while believing abortion is murder. Liberals attack it from a safe sex perspective, teaching about the use of condoms to prevent sexually transmitted diseases and unwanted pregnancies. In very conservative districts where abstinence is taught to young people, where they're largely left to their own devices to figure out what sex is, the rate of teens who experiments with sex is the same as in school systems they teach safe sex. But the pregnancy rates for areas who teach abstinence is much higher than those who teach safe sex. That's because young people who haven't been told how to deal with sex go into it unprepared, while those from more liberal education systems are given condoms and taught how and why they should use them. So clearly this blind approach using religion and abstinence doesn't work. But then look at how a recent study shows rates of AIDS in Washington, D.C. are at 3%, meaning 3 in every 100 D.C. residents have AIDS. 1% would be an epidemic. D.C. is on a par with Uganda and some parts of Kenya with regard to how bad of an AIDS epidemic they suffer from. So clearly something is going wrong with the liberal approach to sexuality as well, unless of course you are a strong advocate of big government that requires big social problems that have to be solved at the taxpayer's expense. Then it totally makes sense. The reason that D.C. and some other inner city AIDS rates are so high is because men go to jail or prison in those areas at alarmingly high rates. In jail, they have sex with other males, then are released where they go back to having sex with females. This spreads AIDS in inner cities very quickly. But who is having an open to the public realistic debate about what's behind men having sex with other men when incarcerated. This conversation goes back to the book of Genesis in the Bible, where there is a story of a young man named Onan who is supposed to lay with his dead brother's wife to have her conceive a child as ordered by his father Judah. Onan didn't want to donate his seed to provide a child other than for himself, so he would spill it on the ground rather than fully consummate fatherhood with Tamar. So Tamar put on a wig to pretend she was a prostitute in order to copulate with her dead father's husband, as God had told her to do. It's said that if she hadn't done this, the tribe of Judah would have ended there, which means David, from David and Goliath, his son Solomon, and their descendants leading through to Jesus would never have existed. If you've ever heard the popular expression claimed to be in the Bible, which is really a loose translation from this story that isn't actually written there, it is better to cast your seed in the belly of a whore than to spill it on the ground, you begin to get an idea of where our problems with dealing with sexuality in a responsible manner came from, and perhaps even the manner in which politics is used to twist ideology so far from reality that whole societies lose sight of what's rational. What I mean is that if I saw an advertisement today that said that it's so immoral to masturbate that it is better to go to a whore than to do so, I would figure automatically that the ad was placed by a pimp. There are other stories in the Bible about soldiers lining up by the hundreds waiting for their turn with the town's one whore. So clearly this message has sent more than a few confusing signals to men throughout the ages. If you study the history as it relates to archaeology, the Adam and Eve saga begins in Mesopotamia over 5,000 years ago, where there are strong parallels between something called the Tablets of Destiny and the story of Adam and Eve eating the apple. These tablets are said to have held secrets of how to build a civilization with a monarch ruler, how to create an economy and a military. It explained technologies with which to accomplish this and how to run the government, and even how to manage brothels as social institutions. These tablets were made of red clay. The eating of the apple by Adam and Eve relates to a story about battles fought for control of the Tablets of Destiny, the apple being the red clay tablets, with a goddess of the sea, meaning a seafaring princess or queen named Tiamat. In this story, one of the oldest writings ever discovered, Tiamat steals the tablets from a king that God was said to have chosen to control the tablets. Tiamat becomes the devil in the Bible. The origins of the Adam and Eve story is about them simply being unwitting aborigines who are domesticated into a new civilization built by lessons learned in the stolen Tablets of Destiny. Since Tiamat was said to have no right to the tablets in the first place, then any civilization she founded that was built with knowledge learned from them was considered illegitimate by the original owners of the tablets, who were said to have been bequeathed them by God, which is who Abraham and the Hebrew people are descended from, or perhaps they are who took the Tablets of Destiny. This is where the term sinner comes from. Citizens of civilizations who might have one day become God's children, except they were born into a society not recognized by God as having a legal right to exist. The point is that the idea of a man simply dealing with the effects that being civilized has on creating his unnatural state of sexuality by spilling his seed on the ground when needed, much the same as dealing with the more natural tendencies to urinate and have bowel movements, it was found early on that telling men it's immoral to masturbate was good for the brothel business. So here we are over 5,000 years later, where young men, many of which are nonviolent drug offenders, are locked up in jails and prisons where much of the only influence they're offered outside of peer pressure is religion.